Hello, everyone out there in streaming world. Welcome to Streaming Media Connect 2024. I am your host and cartographer, Evan Shapiro. Thanks for coming back for another great panel. It's going to be a terrific one. We've got great content all week, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and Thursday. There'll be a link in the chat where you can see the entire agenda. Pick the panels that you want to come. If you come to 2 or more of those panels, you're automatically entered to win an amazing Ozbot Tail Air AI empowered 4K PTZ streaming camera. That's right. You come to 2 panels, you're automatically entered to win that. If you were the first to enter the name and of the band and the name of the song that was just playing as we walked in here virtually, and you're here at the end of the panel, you will win a $50 gift certificate or a $50 gift card from Amazon. But you have to be here to win it. Also, look in the chat for other links like bios to our panelists who are coming on in a second, or a link to Streaming Media NYC, which is our big 3-day conference here in New York City, the Intercontinental Hotel, hosted by me and curated by me. You'll see a link in the chat to that agenda. Register now, you get an early bird price on passes, but also look at panels that you might want to be on. We are still filling some of the seats left on some of these panels across 3 days of really great programming, including some interesting stuff like actual debates using debate club rules. All right, I think that's all of the busy work here. Welcome to our next panel at Streaming Media Streaming Media Connect 2024. Low latency, high stakes, delivering real-time streams at scale. I'm going to bring our great host Tim Siglin to the deck here, and he's going to take it from here and host what's going to be a really great panel. Thanks so much, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely, Evan. Thank you very much. And this is one of those panels that's near and dear to my heart, having come out of video conferencing into streaming and watching latencies become a huge, huge topic in the industry. So I'm going to start first with the sponsor of our panel, Oliver Leitz from Nanocosmos. Oliver, if you'll turn your camera on, introduce yourself to the audience and tell us just a little bit about Nanocosmos.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. I'm Oliver Leitz, co-founder and CEO of Nanocosmos, based out of Berlin in Germany. We provide a live streaming platform called NanoStream Cloud for global delivery, one-to-many live streams for ultra-low latency. We come to the definition later. That means for a sub-second delivery end-to-end. And it's based on a global CDN, player, analytics, security tools, so a comprehensive platform, including everything. Nanocosmos goes back 25 years, so we celebrated last year our anniversary.
So you've been in streaming almost as long as streaming has been around.
That might be in effect, yes.
Very good, nice. And then let's see, Chris, if you will turn your camera on, introduce yourself as well.
Sure, thanks, Tim, and thank you for having me, Steve and Evan. This has definitely been a foundation for me over the years with Stream Media West, Stream Media East. I love being able to participate into a conference that I used to go to all the time back in the day, 10, 12 years ago, just as an attendee. So it's an honor to be here again. My name is Chris Packard. I lead our live operations and streaming teams here at LinkedIn under the leadership of Dan Sweeney, head of studio operations. So we're the internal team that handles all of our large live events, whether it be big customer-facing events like Talent Connect, all the way to our big internal events like our global all hands called Company Connect, which we do every 2 weeks. So and everything in between. We did about 500 different streams last year. Part of that also includes some of our support for our major customers and publishers using LinkedIn Live. So yeah, it's pretty expansive. Ultra low latency is something that we're really kind of getting into right now. It's definitely been like something that's been like the holy grail of streaming, especially at this kind of scale for many years. So I'm really excited to learn more today, and hopefully I can be of help for this panel.
Very good. And Darcy, you've got a new title, but you've been around streaming for quite some time as well. So introduce yourself.
Yes, Darcy Lorenz. Now I'm the CEO of Motorworlds. Yeah, been a while. 98, I guess we started the first live streaming company for sports over here, and been a ride since then. Gone into gaming, wagering, bidding, and now kind of back to gaming, but now this thing they call the spatial web. So latency across all those timelines and dips and doodles been always been there. So glad to talk about those things and see what I can impart on your audience today.
Sounds good. So let's start with a definition of what exactly we mean when we talk about low latency. And Steve, if you wouldn't mind putting up the slide if you get a chance to. I wrote an article, it's probably 8-9 years ago now, called Latency Sucks, where we talk about sort of the different needs in the industry from live to at scale. And obviously, one of the things we've seen there is the industry continues to move closer and closer toward lower latencies. But what do we mean by ultra low latency? What do we mean by real time? What do we mean by low latency? And Oliver, I'm going to let you go first because you've got some really good perspectives on this.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, I think the important topic is from the use case point of view, it's about interactivity. So audience engagement, getting an interactive experience between the audience and the presenters. And that means the latency needs to be sub-second roughly, which is close to real time. That's why the terminology is sometimes a bit vague, but the key point is the use case and the usability, which means interaction. And we see that in different points of view. We saw, as you mentioned, latency is usually very high in broadcast. Since Apple invented HLS, it went up even higher. And we saw the need for ultra low latency delivery to keep the interaction between the audience and the presenters alive. Even in the browser space, it's still kind of challenging to create solutions around that. So that's why we created that ourselves based on the technology we had to enable use cases in the browser for interactivity. And that's things like we are now in a Zoom call, which could be shared to a large audience in the browser, which is currently still within this application, Zoom, but it could be enlarged to larger audiences in the browser to send it out to a platform which enables ultra low latency. It could also be monetized use cases like live auctions, betting, gaming, where you just need interactive and real-time latency, because otherwise you can't provide the business application and the use case you need and the user experience. So latencies of 2, 3 or more seconds are just not acceptable in these monetized scenarios like auctioning, betting. So there's a strong business demand for these applications depending on the use case.
So Darcy, you come out of a background of doing some of the things that Oliver was just describing there, auctions, gaming, etc. What was the criticality of latencies in, sort of your past life in the streaming industry? And now as you're moving into this metaverse model or spatial computing model, what are the limitations that latency presents?
It's all about the experience and the cost. So that balance has always been there, no matter what. And obviously the audience is the most important to keep whole during those cost performance balances. In the bidding world, when you're bidding on something or you're betting, as Oliver said, there's really no room for error. There's money on the line with the push of a button and an interaction. And so obviously the cost is worth it, since especially if you're selling high ticket items like vehicles or doing something in a bet that you're putting, some serious money down, whether it's, large or small, it's serious to you. So you don't want to have latency as a cause for, a bad experience, because that cascades into all kinds of other issues, legal and otherwise. The spatial area is very interesting because everything's moving, everything's communicating. You're having conversations between avatars. There's other streaming things happening. It's, kind of go back to the telephone. I hate to go way back, but you can't have a conversation. So what's the priority is also a big thing. Is the voice priority higher than the background? And, all these things that are in these streaming images are now becoming, bifurcated, and you can deliver the part of the message and other parts later. So be able to understand what you're trying to communicate and what parts of it are more important to get through that pipe is really critical. So we've been playing with those kind of slice and dice of the bandwidth and the actual encoding and things for years. And it does vary by the platform and by the need, but in all these cases, whether it's live sports, whether it's gaming, whether it's bidding, or these new spatial experiences, latency kills them all. And so you just really need to know how to fix it. And the challenges we've had vary, I mean, from crappy to great encoders, from no network to unlimited bandwidth, or so seemingly, all those things play, but that none of them alone solve the problem. So you really have to understand how they all come together in a single experience, and they solve the problem of that experience. And not everything, it's never everything. The background noise, is more important. Is it more important than me hitting the bid button? Probably not. I just want my bid to get in there, and I don't really care about, what else is going on. So you can look at, any experience or anything you're trying to deliver, and you really got to understand what the most important elements of that, whether it's the audio, the video, the interactivity of the data, and really make it, for the user, a great experience, so they can buy something, bid on something, play a game, be in a metaverse.
And it's interesting you mentioned the telephone, because I remember one auction house that we had on a latency panel a couple of years ago said that especially if they're doing auctions, say for horses in rural areas, they'll drop back to an audio call to make sure that they can keep things in the lowest latency possible, rather than necessarily relying on the video stream, because you may be 2 bids behind once the video actually shows up.
Yeah, don't rely on the video delivery for bidding. It's all about the interactivity of the data, and the voice is important, but just that having all those different communicate. We have online, we have phone bids, we have, inside the venue and outside the venue and on the campus. It's all these different things that have to come together. Everybody's got to have the same experience. I hit the button, my bid's in. So it's more complex than a lot of things.
So Chris, you were talking about the all hands meetings that you all do. I think you said once every other week or so. What's kind of the expected latency on something like that?
Yeah, so we have 20,000 employees, about a quarter to half of which are tuning in live. So this is pretty high concurrent view count, right? Yeah, I just want to kind of echo what Darcy was saying. When we get to this level of complexity, there's so much that goes on in terms of like delivering ultra low latency. Right now, in terms of our attendees view, we're using Microsoft Stream embedded on Viva Engage, formerly Yammer. That's a 20-second latency, right? So the end viewer is seeing this 20 seconds later. Now this is acceptable, but when you get into any kind of engagement features, especially in program engagement features, you can't have that, right? There's just too much there. So when we're like smaller meetings where we're on Teams, or even Zoom like we're on right now, we can we can achieve those kind of engagement and with video and audio, up to a much lower concurrent threshold than what I just stated. So I think what's exciting now is like where, in terms of what Oliver's bringing and like the different codecs and technologies to achieve ultra low latency, which has been this kind of holy grail since I feel like ever since I got to LinkedIn. Is I think we're at this point now where, the level of compute just worldwide and just the codecs that and the various technologies, we can achieve this, whether it be WebRTC or other different formats. So this is really the exciting piece of it now. So like, for example, like going back to the global all hands, right? We're bringing people in program contributions, via Zoom, via other codecs into the program itself. But this is not like somebody in the audience on their computer can like raise their hand and be brought into the stream. That's kind of where we're getting to, and that's what's really exciting for me. So that's very dependent upon the technologies of ultra low latency. So, you know, we're working very, very closely with Microsoft, and it's been really cool to see where things are going in that direction. Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't have much to share on that front right now, but I think it's really exciting where we're getting to.
Nice.
Okay,
And as you say, there's a lot of pre-planning that goes into it now to bring those people in at those lower latencies, like Zoom, like Teams, etc.
100%.
Ultimately, the goal with any group doing this would be to allow an audience member to step up to the microphone.
Spontaneously, not pre-planned, correct?
Got it. So Oliver, let's talk about interactivity and some of the challenges around that. I mean, Darcy, you mentioned it briefly, Oliver, and Darcy sort of took it and expanded on it with things like gaming, wagering, etc. What are some of the challenges that interactivity throws into the mix that your company has seen, and how do you go towards solutions models for that?
So in these interactive use cases, you want to have a stable signal in any case. So as Darcy was mentioning, even if video drops, you still want to have audio, but even audio can be very low resolution, very low bitrate to just keep up the monetized video stream to be able to bet or bid on these events. And that's a bit different to broadcast environments where you want to have the highest possible quality on a 4K screen or something. It's a bit different. You usually have access on a mobile phone, even with applications like LinkedIn or any kind other applications. You want to just tune in, watch the live stream, be able to interact, somehow ask questions, maybe be part of a polling, betting, bidding, whatever thing. And that means that you need to keep in sync the interactive stream and the video stream. So the interactive content and the video stream needs both be very low latency, ultra low latency, around 1 second. When you have an eye on that, you even notice that in chat applications, you might have a latency of about 1 second when you just type a text, but that's the limit we are talking about. So to keep that on any device, on any network, even on hostile networks, you need to adjust for the right technology. So there are technologies like WebRTC, but they are a bit difficult to adjust on these different network situations. That's why there's adaptive bitrate, which is established technology for broadcast, but which also works for ultra low latency live streaming, at least in our case, really turn the quality as down as possible, but keep live stream running with the lowest latency possible. And then if the network is going back up again, then you might tune up again to a higher resolution. So that's key, that no matter what happens, if you're commuting, if you're on a bad network, you need to have a constant live stream, otherwise you would lose the connection and probably also the monetization of this distributed live stream.
That's 100% correct. You want to provide variability in your encoding ladder so that if you have someone who's starts high and drops to low versus coming back up. So Darcy, from an interactivity standpoint, I mean, you touched briefly on a few of these things, but when you're talking about interactivity in the spatial web or the metaverse, you're also having to tie it to things like avatars or worlds that don't exist. What extra challenges do you end up with in that as you've approached it?
Yeah, it's coming down back almost to client server stuff. So what exists on your local compute versus in the cloud? How does the network understand those elements that come together in this single experience? And then you have conversations like we're having now. The one I'm finding that's most challenging just right now, so everybody knows, is how to talk to a language model and have it talk back to me like we're having a real conversation. And you see these agents and avatars now being pretty real time and pretty human. But if you can't have a conversation, it immediately breaks down that experience. And now you're going, okay, it's just a bad experience with an avatar. So you now have to actually have the avatar thinking that it's feeding back in that language model sitting in the network somewhere, and it's got to have a conversation in real time like we're having right now. So that is definitely the most challenging. And last week, they just introduced a new thing called Sora, which is going to now create on the fly scenes, literally video development as you go. So you walk through these metaverses and it's unfolding in front of you based on what you want to see. and you're having a conversation at the same time, you think about all those elements. Those are new elements now that nobody ever thought of. You know, the scenes in the background, you could encode and figure out what a field looked like compared to a player, and what a ball looked like compared to all that was elements he's understand. Now it's actually unfolding in real time. How does anything understand what it's looking at in terms of the scene or the frame? So there's going to be a lot of new challenges for sure in this world. And you know, the gaming has set us up pretty much for success. The Fortnites, the Minecrafts, the Roblox of the world, you know, they have to figure this stuff out because they're doing this stuff at scale. And I don't see them throwing in a, you know, a self generating experience that they still have to worry about keeping the backgrounds pretty solid. And you know, we have millions of people in servers. How do you get across those servers? And there's so much in the metaverse that's about problems we've solved in other industries that is at scale that we've never even thought about before. You never thought there was going to be 10,000 people in a server all experience a concert or at a, you know, virtual event. And that's happening now all the time. And they're talking to each other, and they're talking to bots, and they're talking to avatars. So it's just it's a big, it's a fun challenge. I mean, I retired for a reason. I came over here to do something fun again. And this is definitely something to challenge us all. And we're all heading to the metaverse, whether we like it or not. So we better get used to solving these challenges, or else it's going to break down and people are going to go, it's a crappy experience. I'm not going to do it again.
You know, I still like the choose your own adventure books. I don't know if I'm headed to the metaverse. But you bring up an interesting point, which is if latencies defined in the bot world are different than latencies we define, when they say on the fly, creating things like that, if they're adding additional latency to what we're doing on the video side, it could actually cause a really interesting problem. So that leads to part of the conversation around synchronization. How important is synchronization versus latency? And Chris, I know you mentioned the onboarding of somebody who, you know, who's in the audience at an all hands meeting. And I know you said that's sort of the holy grail where you're going. Is there a balance, though, that we say we don't necessarily need ultra low latencies on it as long as we have synchronization, or do we have to have both, as low latency as possible and everybody synchronized receiving the content at the same time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm still kind of blown away about Darcy bringing up Sora and OpenAI and real time, you know, AI creation in the metaverse. So I haven't really thought about that. So I'm just kind of, that's where my mind went. But in terms of synchronization, yeah, I know it's like, whoa. I mean, I'm sure
it's a great challenge for us to think about too in our industry, because we're in a stovepipe over here going, let's lower latencies, and on the other hand, there may be faster or slower latencies in the metaverse, so to speak, with AI models. So good point.
Absolutely. And just to touch base on Sora for a minute, if we're talking, I mean, we've been talking about ultra low latency since I joined LinkedIn like 7 years ago. And you look at Sora and like where those OpenAI video creation models were like a year ago, it's just amazing what they are today, right? So if that at the same type of progression with AI happens in ultra low latency environments, I think, you know, sky's the limit. I'm not sure if I 100% agree with Darcy on like we're all going to metaverse. I do support Tim, like the choose your own adventure. I think there's more to be said about the augmented reality that we have right here. So that's where my mind goes. And you know, I think we kind of learned. I'm kind of going off on the side, but I think we kind of learned during the pandemic that people need in-person interaction. They can't just be locked in this metaverse. So I think there's a coexistence there that I think, but I am really excited about what's in the metaverse. Going back to your original question, synchronization and ultra low latency. You know, I think in terms of like what we're seeing, that's it's very unique to LinkedIn, but I think because our CEO values, communication, I think we're the only company in the world this large that has a global all hands every 2 weeks, right? And we're piping in feeds from every different office in the world, so we can see them in real time via like DSMs that he can see from stage. So if he wants to take in somebody goes in the mic, say in Omaha, Nebraska, or in London or whatever, he can just, choose that. The feed's coming right in. Now, this is using standards that our broadcast engineering team has developed, which is like using like RIST and different, Zoom integrations and as well. So that's when you're getting into like the world of just, signal acquisition in program. Those have to be very spot on, very ultra low latency. But then on the end user, we're looking at 30 seconds. So now, like, what if there's a world in which both the presenters that are like in our offices as well as just on their computers at home can anytime raise their hand and come on to the stage onto the more of the virtual stage, maybe like outside the production control room, but in program feed. That's what's really exciting because it merges both of our worlds instead of just the stream being the output of the control room environment, right? So, and then everybody downstream doesn't have that level of interaction. They have it via chat and that sort of thing on Yammer, but not the same, right? So I think that's where we're getting to. I think we've been thought leaders in this space for some time. I think that we kind of borrow things from leaders like Darcy and Oliver in this world and foreseeing what we can and cannot do. So the stuff that you do in the metaverse, we're thinking about ways to bring it in. I don't know if you saw the I forget what it's called, but Facebook had it's like the ultra photorealist avatars. That just blew my mind. Like if we could have I don't know if it works for LinkedIn, but if we could have some kind of virtual representation of our CEO that can be accessed and everyone else has their own individual avatar. I don't know. Maybe that's where we're heading. But I do think that the in-person interactivity is still going to be paramount, still going to be like where people are wanting to be, but we also have to be very cognizant of folks that are in different locations and not have some kind of like location bias and make sure everybody's on equal footing to contribute and be heard.
And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Talked about the avatar piece. There's maybe even a more practical example these days. Like I can't watch Premier League during the day because I'm supposed to be working, but I can at least have the little graphic that shows the position of the ball and which player is touching the ball, which is a metadata thing that's generated on the fly. I can watch that, and then if I see that there's something that happened there where a goal was scored, I can always flip over to watch it live because it's about 20 seconds delayed. So it gives me that ability to sort of monitor it, but also go over and see it in real time from a streaming standpoint. So Oliver, synchronization, how important is that?
Yeah, first of all, coming back to the avatar thing, so it's exactly something which some of the betting and gaming vendors are doing. So providing a virtual like game field, anything like that, and separate to the video content, sometimes because of also legal rights for distribution. So there's a mix and match of different types of content, computer generated or camera generated content. So both can be combined by AI, but they can also run separate. And we're also working on some AI assisted video to enhance the video experience. For example, also subtitles are more and more coming into the game, like automatically generated subtitles for any kind of content. But coming back to a question about synchronization, it's for our cases, we see it's very important to keep the latency on the same level for everybody. That means if you have a low latency, ultra low latency, like sub-second stream for everybody, then you don't need to worry so much about sync because everybody is in the low latency space anyways. It's more like you really need to turn the quality down, as I mentioned, as far as possible, keep the live stream running. And for what you're referring to is probably this kind of broadcast comparison with the cheering of the audiences to keep that in sync with the live stream, which is kind of broadcast one-to-many on the broadcast field, OTT, but also in the streaming field to keep that in sync. That's not really ultra low latency and no interactivity involved. So everybody wants to enjoy a game or something, an event, maybe on a lean back experience, sitting on a couch on a 4K monitor. And no matter if they are on a TV screen or on a computer screen or on a mobile, they want to have the same experience. But there's no interaction. And when it comes to betting or interacting with the presenters, like purchasing something like or merchandise or so, then you need to come to the real-time space to be in the interactive experience.
So it's interesting you talk about the crowd cheering, because that's one of the examples I use with synchronization. I find if I'm watching a game, I either want to be far enough away from hearing other people cheer, or I want to have some form of very low latency, whether it's the text or seeing the game in the metadata model, so that I know what's going on before I hear a reaction from other people. What is the what are some of the other synchronization issues that people might face, besides sort of hearing reaction from other people first? Is it things like the slowdown of the video as we get a higher number of people viewing it? Because I know early on, at least with the Super Bowl in the States, what you tended to see was it might drift anywhere from 30 seconds delay to 2 minutes delay on a really, really popular part of the game. Is that something we still also face these days, or have we sort of addressed those issues?
You probably face it because you have, if you really have huge audiences like several millions, there are CDNs in the place which cache the content somehow, and they might distribute that to separate pops, and then the latency gets higher. But that usually doesn't matter if it's then 20 seconds or 40 seconds, not such a big deal usually. But to cover the load for these huge audiences, you need to probably distribute that in a cached manner through different CDNs, and then have CDN fallback to other infrastructure systems or anything like that to not lose the signal.
Okay, got it. Chris or Darcy, one of you started to make a comment as well.
Oh, I just asked who you were asking the question to, but actually, back to the last question about also being in the metaverse, we're already there. You're talking to customer service agents that aren't people. So I actually don't like the term metaverse because it takes you right away to this immersive avatar thing. It's just about AI-driven experiences. So sorry. Look, I think it's still there, but it's, between delay and latency are different things. So predictable delay, we've always experienced that. That's what broadcast was about. It was always, but it was fixed, and they knew what time it took to create a similar or synchronized experience between everybody. We already do that in streaming. That's easy to, introduce the delay. Problem with streaming is, especially if you have multiple CDNs, then how do all those endpoints synchronize to this thing? I don't know if you remember a thing called Psy from Net Insight, and then Amazon bought it. They never fixed the problem, but that was a great solution. They had a centralized server, had a clock on it, and it kept everybody on the same frame at the same time. It was a great experience, but it didn't exist across all the networks. So you had to be on this single network. It was good for the company because that's what they sold, was they're geared to all the operators. In the end, I think a lot of that bandwidth has taken some of this away. But right away, what happens is they start piling more experiences on. You said highlights. You watched the basketball MVP, game the other day, and it was an LED floor. How does that look on a screen, whether it's streamed or not? All those stats that you see in football on Thursday night, when on Nickelodeon, when they've got sliming around. I mean, there's so much going on now that how do you create a singular experience for all the audiences? They just keep pushing the boundary. They just stayed where they were, and it's still live streaming sports like it was 20 years ago. we'd be having perfect experiences with no delays. But we keep piling more and more into those scenes, into those frames, and we have more challenges. And of course, I think that just starts the whole that delay thing too. Everybody's got a device in their hands now, so even inside the venue, they're consuming the resources, and when they're in the around the venue, people are consuming all the resources inside now because they're all sharing videos. Social media, you may ask what has to be synchronized. That is an absolute, but how do you do that? If a social feed comes through about a bet before the thing happens, and that can't happen because social's fast and it's just small messages sometimes. You got all these factors. Social is the worst thing. I mean, if you're behind social, you're out of business. So you got to really figure that out.
It's interesting you talk about that in the venue, Darcy. I was talking to an engineer at one of the large motorsports facilities here in the US, and they said they tuned the Jumbotron so that the Jumbotron and the TVs in the owner's suite are in sync when the national anthem is being sung.
Yep.
Because if he sees those out of sync, there's a problem. So yeah, it is perception. So I'm going to go back to broadcast real quick, because we've all sort of alluded to broadcast delays. And in the States, it's typically 5 to 8 seconds delay. There's a question from the audience that said, from a broadcast TV over OTT streaming, what's your opinion about what the latency goal should be and why? So in the States, our delay for broadcast television is intentional for the dump button, but obviously we can go much lower than that as we progress with streaming. Is there a point at which we say, you know what, acquisition needs to be ultra low latency, but it's okay to delay everything this 5 to 8 seconds because we don't necessarily want to get ahead of television, so to speak? And I'll put that out to any of you.
For my reply, so it really depends on the use case. If you need that, if you just need same time for the cheering, it's not really worth the effort to bring it down to ultra low latency, because you don't have interactivity. So 5 to 6 seconds or a bit more should be sufficient. And then you need to understand what also at what level you operate in terms of getting the right metrics together. It's something we didn't mention yet, but to understand where everybody is at, or where the majority of the audience is at latency, collect these metrics from the audience to understand if everybody is in line with the latency you expect from your use case.
Okay. Darcy, Chris, any thoughts on that?
Whatever you can afford.
Yes,
get as low as you can within your budget. And, even if you're not using it, if you can sustain that, at least you can take care of all the other issues. There's so many other issues that come up that rely on the available resources. You got to get it down, because it's not always just about the end user or the amount of people that are watching things or how many cameras you have. There could just be a first or last mile issue. And you don't know what those are. For sure, last mile, you don't know what your consumers have, but they could be in important places. And then you mentioned on and off, venue. That's just, you can't have it on and off different. So broadcast, a lot of those times they're rebroadcasting back into the venue. And so now you have a real big disconnect. And I've been to lots of sporting events where I'm like, oh, I can't even watch that Jumbotron because it's going to frustrate me, because it's, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. So broadcast has to take into account where it's actually being consumed. And if it stays on the linear experience, I guess it's okay to stay at 5 to 8. If you're trying to get it to a betting experience or bidding, then it's got to be less. But those kind of things can, there's an affordability factor. If I'm taking money in for every viewer, and it's not just a lean back experience, of course I can afford to give them a better, at least first mile, and don't scrimp on it, because that's, you scrimp on first mile and everything else is off the table.
Yeah, I think that's some really good points, Darcy. I think it's really going to kind of come down to what customer demand and user demand is going to be. I think most people don't even realize that broadcast television's 5 to 8 seconds delayed. They think it's all happening real time all around the world. So, with that, I think people have kind of discovered that now, you saw YouTube TV achieve 8 million subscribers. I have YouTube TV. I watch all football games on YouTube TV, Red Zone, etc. it's got to be like a full minute delay because I'm a big Rams fan. One of my, my best buddies in St. Louis and LA, they're watching it on broadcast and they're hitting me up about things, that are happening. Like, wait, don't tell me yet, I have to watch it. So I think we're going to get to the point now where, YouTube TV is going to have so many subscribers, and they're all starting to realize that this stuff is really delayed. And obviously there's costs associated, like Darcy said, why it has to be like about a minute, right? Now, what could there be a like a Sunday NFL ticket package that is ultra low latency, that's a higher fee? That's something that I think YouTube TV, but it's really going to be focused on our customers demanding this. I'm sure like sports bettors are going to demand it, right? They're probably the ones still paying for their broadcast or their cable TV package, right? So yeah, we'll see where it gets to, especially in this day of like the real time betting on all those services, with like real time or daily fantasy, etc. So yeah, it's really good points to bring up.
You'll see what happens in March Madness. I guarantee that, and that's coming up in 2 weeks. So we'll see some new things, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, even with the St. Louis Cardinals, a 1 minute delay, somebody could be 3 bases around, and
yeah,
they won't have made a home run, but they'll at least be to third base. So, anyway,
right.
So Oliver, when we're talking about sort of this analytics thing, how do we measure and what do we measure if we want to optimize for lower latencies?
It's a good question. So Darcy just brought up a good topic, the first mile. It starts at the camera already and the first mile. So if you fail in the first mile for latency, you will lose it for the whole distribution workflow. So first mile, then middle mile, the CDN architecture, the preparation of the live stream, different adaptive bitrate ladders, etc. And then you have the player side and the last mile. So each part of the workflow affects latency. And having metrics on each part of the workflow is required to understand how large the latency end-to-end is and if you can keep up with interactive experiences. That means you need to collect data from the ingress point already, ideally already from the encoder if there are interfaces for that. But the first ingress point already takes up the live stream from the contribution. And then going through the system, collect data of the system if anything in the international distribution goes wrong. And then on the last mile, also collect metrics in the player and bring that together somehow, aggregate that and make that visible to you as an application vendor, and to understand how long the latency is or if there is any potential issue in the workflow, like dropping connections or so, which you can adjust either on the contribution side, which should never happen, but also on the distribution side, where you might have parts in the workflow which have bad networks or anything like that, which you might address by reaching out to the audiences or bringing up different server infrastructure points. So it's a complex task, but getting the metrics together is very helpful to understand for the provider, but also for the user or for the vendor to get insight into the quality of your live streams.
Darcy, from a measurement standpoint, what are some of the critical things to measure in the part of the industry you're in?
Well, measuring down at the client side, especially on gaming, you need to have, and that gaming's already there because there's a client and there's a server. So you can always put the agents in that game that give you the quality of service that's being delivered. I'm on the board of a company that's all they do is they're constantly monitoring in game sessions what's going on between the client and server, and they're trying to reroute packets accordingly. So being able to figure out if that game experience is consistent, you said synchronization. Well, that's what it's all about in a game. You've got 100 people playing a first-person shooter game. There's no room for anything not synchronized, but you've got to set thresholds, and those alarms have to come off. You might have to drop players because they're creating experience. Two people with bad network all of a sudden make the game unwatchable for everybody. So you also, I'd say, sometimes people have to be gone out of an experience, especially interactive. It's not great news, but do you take the 2 people or do you take the 100? What's your balance? So watching the structure of the experience and watching these agents and the thresholds and making sure you stay in those bookends that you know is going to create a good experience for everybody. You need to monitor that constantly. And, hopefully you never see those alarms, but they happen inevitably. And then you have to have actions, and those need to be automated. You can't be looking at every one of the million users. You just have to say, if it goes outside of the threshold, take the quality of video down, make audio, over video, or get rid of them. Whatever that is, you have to set those business rules. And you have to make hard decisions. And look, the audience realizes, look, if I got a shitty connection at home, I'm gonna be gone. I'm sorry, I can't play the game. And you go, that going in. Some people get upset, but the end game is you've got to monitor all of that. The servers, inevitably, there's very little issue there, unless it's a data center issue or some congestion in the middle mile. But it's mostly back to that first or last mile. What are they getting there, and when do they fall outside of the boundaries of what's reasonable for you as a provider and for them as a user to provide acceptable experience? And downgrading until you hit that threshold, and then you dump. That just has to happen. So we do that all the time in all kinds of places. I've been doing it since sports, and I'm still doing it over in gaming, and it's the way it is.
So Chris, you're doing internal meetings. What kind of metrics are you looking at there? Is it average bandwidth? Is it number of drops, intermittency, that kind of thing? What are the decisions that are being made there from a measurement standpoint?
Yeah, good question for measurement. So we also handle our large external events and conferences and studio shows. So it's not just that. That's primarily pushing to LinkedIn Live. But in terms of the internal global all hands, that's really what our team focuses on. The rest of them are kind of more different team that for smaller meetings that we'll spin up Zooms and that sort of thing. But I guess to think about what we're looking at primarily are end user issues. So our team actually does handle the if anybody has problems accessing the stream, they can submit a form, we can get back to them. The issues primarily are around like just getting the stream or like audio, like basic stuff like that. And then if it's just that, then we know we're doing a good job. We use Hive Analytics. There are some really cool analytic tools that are coming through with Microsoft's and their different eCDN efforts that we've been utilizing. So this is like, we're not only just seeing like viewership, like peak concurrence, average view time, like which geos, et cetera, but also quality of experience. So this has been a real, it's something that's kind of, hard to navigate without these tools, but seeing like which level of bandwidth is going to these users and seeing different problem areas in real time has been it's been really great to see. But we're at a place now where it's almost like the challenges we saw maybe at the beginning of the pandemic we don't see anymore. So it's a little bit kind of forgotten, right? So we're in a kind of I knock on wood, I don't want to jinx it. We're in a kind of like a smooth streaming area right now, but primarily like our number one goal is 100% uptime for each employee who wants to access the stream, whether it be from a conference room, from their computer, from mobile device. We want to make sure that that's all seamless and that if they do have challenges, we're seeing to that we resolve them in real time quickly. So yeah, I guess it's a couple of different things, right? It's the overall impact of these streams for our company, but also just general technical, accessibility issues. So yeah.
You mentioned that about half of the people watch it on demand, half watch it live. Is that?
No, I think it's more live than on demand we're seeing. So we do push our on demand streams to our LinkedIn Learning, which is formerly Lynda. LinkedIn acquired Lynda in 2015. So we upload internally to LinkedIn Learning, and we see that probably about 30% maybe watch it on demand. But by and large, we want people to watch it live. We want people to be able to engage. And that's the key of ultra low latency, like engagement. Without that level of engagement, it's like, why would you watch it live, right? So it has to feel like a shared experience. So that's why what we're talking about is so important.
Okay. All right. Good deal. And one final question, Oliver, to you before we go to some audience questions. Security. One of the things that we've heard in the past is you can do security for on-demand content. You could do it for sort of average latency content. But as we're getting into these low latency solutions around WebRTC and others, how do we maintain both a digital rights management model and an encryption model as we go forward?
Yeah, there are many different components around that. So there's potential abuse from any direction. And getting a stream, first thing is, of course, encryption of the stream, but then you have to access the stream. Even if you put in DRM, that might be a kind of legitimate access you get. And then you still have possible abuse from the system, what you can detect by just guessing kind of unexpected access to the live streams. So for example, anybody watching the live stream 24/7 without any interruption, or accessing always from the same IP, or any kind of attack you see from remote locations you usually don't expect, and then hijacking the stream, copying the content, downloading it somewhere else, or restreaming it somewhere else. So there are different things around that, and we experience quite a lot of different possible attack scenarios here, which we noticed it's important to bring also into a platform to be aware of potential scenarios like that, and to give you the ability to detect them on the one hand, which is part of the metrics somehow, but also to turn certain access down and disallow further access of these abusers.
Okay, very good. So Steve's going to do a couple questions from the audience, but I want to just give two clarifications. Somebody asked, Chris, you mentioned smooth streaming. You actually didn't mean Microsoft Smooth Streaming.
Oh,
I almost
no.
made a pun of that, but somebody asked for that clarification. And secondly,
Oh, wow. I haven't thought about smooth streaming in some time. Yeah.
Sure it wasn't Silverlight?
yeah, there we go. I still have
Yeah.
Silverlight on an old Mac that functions surprisingly.
Yeah.
So
Silverlight.
the other thing is someone asked a question about codecs, and I would encourage people to go watch the session that I did earlier today, which was specifically around codecs and codecs for low latency as well as intermittent networks. So thank you to each of the panelists, and I'm going to hand it over to Steve here real quick to ask a couple of the audience Q&As.
Yeah, and just Tim mentioned, as Tim alluded to, all the sessions from the conference will be on our YouTube channel early next week, and that's youtube.com/streamingmediavideos. So got a question here from Mark Winiarski, and it's quite a long one. How do you deal with website bloat, lack of developer optimization for different bandwidth availabilities on the viewer's end? And Mark himself comments, a lack of internet equality, availability, and net neutrality heavily affects streaming online, in or out. I saw Oliver, you typed an answer to that. Anyone, Oliver, do you want to talk about that live, or anyone else want to take this one?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I typed the question, so I'm sorry, it seems to be closed already, so no one else can type, but I can maybe explain what I mean, what I meant, that website bloat is not only the video or audio, but it can also be any graphics, gaming elements when it comes to things like avatars, etc. You can also blow up your website in terms of client performance, but also network load. So that's why it's important to keep an eye on that and to have an understanding of how the performance is, getting the right performance metrics, and turn the quality down or network usage down somehow in your application. When it comes to streaming, it's of course adaptive bitrate, but it's also maybe related to other parts of your website.
Great. Any other questions for our panel? This is a great discussion. I guess we'll just go ahead and wrap it up here. Unless anyone has anyone have any kind of closing comments you want to slip in there before we go? Okay, I think we're good. And there's Evan. And Evan's on mute.
And Evan's on mute because he's a professional host. I want to thank our sponsor, Oliver, and everyone at Nanocosmos for making this panel happen. This was a great conversation. Big crowd the whole time, hanging on every word there. I love to see somebody from LinkedIn, which is my home away from home, on a panel. So thanks for that. Thanks, everybody. Our winner. And I think this is the are you required to have the Pogues in every conference, Steve, or is that just am I noticing the pattern?
That's my personal preference.
Okay, I thought so. So our walk-up music was the Pogues, Squid Out of Water. Winner was, who was that?
Paul Fileo.
Paul, congratulations. You were here first, and you won that gift card from Amazon. Congratulations. Stick around if you can, or come back for our next panel, which is at 2:30 today. So just about a half an hour from now, targeting, measuring, scaling connected TV advertising, something following on Dana's commentary earlier today, one of the most important areas, and frankly, big news today in the connected television world. So I'm sure this will come up. Walmart is buying Vizio. That happened, I think, as this panel was happening or thereabouts. So a lot going there. As Steve mentioned earlier, all the content from Streaming Media Connect 2024 is going to be on the YouTube page either later this week or very soon. Steve will put the link in the chat there. Steve, anything I missed?
No, I think that's everything. We'll
Cool.
see you all in a bit.
Take it easy. Great
Thanks,
job,
Paul.
panel.
Bye.